What are some downright disturbing facts you know? In the old days, poor people would sell their teeth to rich people. Ever thought about how whales and dolphins die? When they get too old and too weak to swim up to the surface to breathe, they start to slowly sink towards the deep, cold depths of the ocean, and suffocate in the dark. There's like 30-something nuclear warheads that are just out there unaccounted for. Chlamydia is so rampant among koalas that some populations have tested 100% positive, and it's one of the main reasons the koala population is decreasing. Over 40% of murders in the USA go unsolved. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, a false alarm at a Soviet bunker indicated the launch of multiple American nuclear missiles. Everyone in the bunker except for one man, Stanislav Petrov, thought it was a real attack, but Petrov, correctly, assumed that if the USA was to launch an attack, it would have been hundreds of bombs, leading him to not tell higher-ups, who likely would have ordered a counterattack, leading to nuclear war, about the missiles, likely saving billions of lives. TLDR, we were a single person's decision away from a full-out nuclear war. One of the reasons Japan has such a high suicide rate is because when the police can't solve a murder, they label it as a suicide and end the investigation. During World War II, Japan bombed China with fleas infected with the bubonic plague. When your immune system recognizes that you have eyes, you'll turn blind, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can get rabies without even realizing it, and won't get a diagnosis until it's far too late to treat it. In the 90s, a British Airways pilot was sucked out of the cockpit at 23,000 feet due to a poorly installed window seal failure, and he got pinned against the airplane as the flight attendants tried to keep him from completely getting sucked away, but he survived, suffering only a few bone fractures and frostbite. I was cleaning the garage with my mom shortly after my dad died, and I found a very long, very sad breakup letter from my dad to my mom dated July 2, 1985. I asked her about it, what happened, and she kind of chuckled and went, "Oh, we got everything sorted out the next day and we're back together again." I was born 9 months later on April 1, 1986. I was the product of make-up sex and had the letter in my hand that started the events of my existence. Dogs only like squeaky toys because it sounds like prey that's frightened or injured and thus easy for them to kill. The world's youngest confirmed mother was 5 years old. That's really messed up. The word mortgage comes from a French term that means death pledge, or a contract that only expires upon death. The US government was exposed for illegally spying on its citizens through their webcams in 2013, and no one even really gave a shit or did anything about it. They mostly just called the dude who did it, Edward Snowden, a traitor, so it's still probably happening. The Japanese brutalities during the Nanjing massacre was so extreme, the head Nazi representative in the region complained directly to Hitler about it. When filming Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in Germany in 1970 and 1971, they had trouble casting the Oompa Loompas, as people who suffered with disabilities were simply killed by the Nazis during the war. Hundreds of dead babies were found in the septic tank of a mother and baby home in Tuam, Ireland. No one has any idea how many children died under the system countrywide, or how many children were forcibly taken from their mothers and sold to childless families abroad. When the German battleship Bismarck went down after hours of constant battering, 1,500 of the 2,000 men crew were able to jump into the ocean. The Royal Navy rescued 500 of them, but left early due to lack of fuel and the threat of submarines. Over 1,000 men were left on the ocean to die, having just survived pure hell. Today the area of the wreck is littered with thousands of leather boots, having once belonged to the crew which died because they were abandoned. The average age of the crew was little over 20 years. In a lot of Western societies, the highest cause of deaths in males under 45 years old is suicide. Researchers in the 70s kept a dolphin in a flooded basement and gave it acid and jerked it off to try and teach it to speak English. The dolphin committed suicide because it fell in love with the handler that jerked it off. NASA was once talking with Sesame Street to send Big Bird into space on the Challenger rocket, but they went with a teacher instead, which means that in an alternate universe close to ours, Big Bird was a casualty in the Challenger disaster. SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. There's a small chance, 1/1000th per year on average, that someone with epilepsy will just die during their sleep. There are a lot of theories, but no real reason for this has ever been found. Only 1% of arsonists are convicted. Only 10% of arsons are even solved. In some states a person can be declared incompetent and put in a conservatorship, medicated against their will and have their assets sold to pay for it all while they are all doped up, all without ever being served papers or notified because they can't handle the truth. Like Britney, but without anyone telling her, just drugging her coffee every day. Edit. Also, guardianship can be imposed despite a person being married or otherwise having a responsible person already involved. Guess who profits? I've talked about this before. Motorcycle helmets are ridiculously unsafe if you live in America. The Department of Transportation, DOT, standard is so low that bicycle helmets have passed it. QRD of this great video on it. Face shields are untested, a loose pebble could shatter it and it would still pass DOT. Companies can choose their own testers, they can and do choose the most lenient standards, based on car accidents, not motorcycle crashes. Failure is 400 grams of impact. 290 grams is what cracks your freaking skull open. Chin bars were not tested. Roll-off is not tested. 20% of DOT approved helmets, when retested, did not pass. Minimal tests are announced, which is standard, but manufacturers can and do make helmets stronger in test areas, but nowhere else. TLDR, the DOT helmet standards are killing people and giving people a false sense of security. An admiral in the British Navy was killed by firing squad for not doing his utmost when ordered to claim the island of Minorca. Admiral Byng discovered the island had already been claimed by a French fleet and decided to turn his men around to save their lives rather than sail into suicide. Britain couldn't admit that France beat them to it and blamed the loss of Minorca on the admiral and sentenced him to die. They used newspaper comics and propaganda to spread misinformation about the admiral's incompetence to get the public behind his execution. Basically, this guy died because of nationalism. There's a new analysis of his career and death which was a part of why, recently, the Byng name cleared and the admiral was given back his honor. Murder rates in the US is 5 in 100,000. Which means, next time when you go to a stadium with at least 20,000 people, there is a chance that there is a murderer in that stadium. In 1972 a plane crashed in the Andes on a snowy mountain. 16 of the 45 people, mostly guys of a rugby team from Uruguay, survived there for 72 days. They had to eat the human flesh of the people who died during or after the crash in order to survive. No one knew where the plane crashed exactly and they were only found because 2 of the guys walked for 10 days over the mountains and down into a valley where a farmer found them. Edit. They found a camera in the luggage and took photos of themselves. Most of them are online and you can even see parts of the bodies, bones and flesh laying around. I don't recommend looking them up if you're really sensitive. A dragonfly's penis is shaped like a key. Lobotomies were a complete guessing game and the procedure's success was mostly based on whether or not the patient was deemed calm and quiet post-surgery. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized lobotomies in America, wasn't even a surgeon. He had to partner with an actual surgeon to attempt the procedure. But Freeman didn't care for the length of the surgery. So he invented the ice pick lobotomy. Use an ice pick to access the brain by hammering the pick through the bone above the eye and near the nose, and then just wiggling it around. As stated before, Freeman was not a surgeon. So when the actual surgeon he partnered with walked into their shared office to find Freeman with an ice pick halfway in a patient's brain, their partnership ended immediately. But that didn't stop Freeman from continuing his work with lobotomies. He toured the nation in a van he called the Lobotomobile, offering the procedure to insane asylums with problem patients. Freeman completed over 3,000 lobotomies throughout his career, of which nearly 500 patients died and 1,000 were left in a vegetative state. The crew of Challenger likely survived over a minute after the initial explosion. They were killed by the impact on the water. There is evidence that members of the crew even started trying to complete emergency procedures. Slavery is still one of the most profitable trades in the modern world. Your anus relaxes and contracts when you laugh. Female hyena clitoris are larger than male hyena penis and apos. There was a serial killer in the 19th to 20th century who murdered, raped, and cannibalized children and would send letters to their parents describing how their children tasted. Truly one of the most sickening men in recent memory. High school teacher attempting to teach why Nazi Germany did what they did, started experiments in class. In days, it grew out of control and the students fully adopted their new order. In the 1940s, before the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the US made around 1.5 million Purple Hearts in anticipation of casualties. Since the bombings occurred, there was quite a surplus of hearts left over, thus some of those very hearts are still given out to this day. Male Argentinian lake ducks will use their 17-inch penises as a lasso to capture fleeing females, drag them back to the male, and then proceed to violently gang rape them. I recently learned this and maybe I'm stupid for not knowing already. The human has two anal sphincters, the first one we have no control over, but the second one of course we can control. When the stool comes through the first sphincter, the urge to go to the bathroom is felt. That a man with half his brain blown out the back of his head and the top of his skull missing, can still blink, look at you and attempt to form words. During World War II, Imperial Japan operated prisoner transports known colloquially as hell ships. As the name implies, conditions aboard them were downright atrocious. Prisoners were crammed into steaming hot, unventilated cargo holds to the point that it was basically standing room only. Food and water was incredibly sparse, there were no bathroom facilities, and abuse from the guards was commonplace. Death from starvation, infection, dysentery, dehydration, and so on was common, and more suffered from delirium due to the conditions. Many of these ships were sunk during the war, and oftentimes the vast majority prisoner of war cargo would be unable to escape and go down with the ships, the worst being Junyo Maru, sunk by the submarine HMS Tradewind with 5,620 POWs and slave laborers. Though the Japanese gave no indication that these ships were carrying POWs, and them also transporting soldiers and military equipment made them valid targets. A hoarder had her house filled so much she didn't even notice that her son had passed in her home.